Welcome to the Cyber Sangha podcast. Cyber Sangha is a program of free live broadcasts, launched in 2009 by renowned teacher and author Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche. Join us as we draw on ancient Tibetan wisdom to discover how to connect with our best self and live to our highest potential. The following conversation, Emotional Balance and Meditation, a Synergistic Relationship, happened on April 6, 2021, as a science and spirituality dialogue with Ekman, Elisa Kozasa, Geshe Tenzin Wangyal, and host Alejandro Chaoul-Reich. This was part of a year-long series, A Year of Body, Speech, and Mind. This content is for informational purposes only. Listeners should consult medical professionals for any physical or mental health concerns. Please use headphones and do not meditate while driving or operating machinery.
Hi, and welcome everyone to Cyber Sangha. My name is Alejandro Chaoul, and I will be the host of this event today. I'm delighted to have Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche together with Drs. Ekman and Dr. Elisa Kozasa. And for those of you who have joined us before in this set of events, we have done one with body with Lorenzo Cohen and Satbir Singh Khalsa. We have done one on breath with Judith Simmer Brown and Shirley Tellis. And now we are on mind. And so, by the way, those others you can see in cybersangha.net. You can still be able to watch those. Today, we're focusing on mind and particularly on emotional balance and meditation and that synergistic relationship. And so, before we start, I wanted to briefly introduce the speakers, although I'll just say a couple of lines. There's so much more to say about them. And the richness comes when they start not only talking, but interacting. So Geshe Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche probably does not need much of an introduction here in this forum. And he was born in India from Tibetan parents and then studied in India and then went to Menri Monastery there. And when he graduated in 1986, he went to Tibet and then came to the West. And we benefited greatly from his being here in the West for almost 30 years. I've been very fortunate to be a student of him for the last almost 30 years. And one of what he has brought is the Cyber Sangha, which is this platform. And this was his vision way before COVID. So he already had this vision of we need to connect, to interconnect to people everywhere. Because even though he does travel to almost the 35 centers all over the world, or he used to travel before COVID, there's still so many other people to reach. And being able to reach with this forum and the many different events that he does, it's really, really wonderful. So it's really an honor to be in this platform working with him. So together with him today, we have Dr. Ekman, who's a PhD and also a master's in social work. And she's a senior fellow at UC Berkeley's Greater Good Science Center. And she's the director of Cultivating Emotional Balance Training Program. She's at the UCSF faculty. And she is an incredible, wonderful human being and practitioner. And I'm really delighted to have you here, Eve. Elisa is joining us from Sao Paulo, Brazil. And so Elisa is also a PhD in the area of, a researcher in the area of neuroscience. And actually, I know Elisa for a long time. I'm from Argentina, she's from Brazil, but also because through our research work, particularly with Tibetan sound meditation that comes from Rinpoche's book, Tibetan Sound Healing, and how we were doing it both at MD Anderson and at Einstein Hospital in Brazil, where she is a professor there. And she's also now the president of Tibet House in Brazil. So it's really an honor to have you here, Elisa. Welcome.
Thank you so much.
Sure. So as we start, I want to give first the microphone, as we say here, to Rinpoche, and to tell us a little more about Cyber Sangha as a whole, not only idea, but all the things that are happening. Thank you, Rinpoche.
Thank you. Thank you, Alex, for a wonderful introduction. And I wanted to welcome Dr. Eve Ekman, Dr. Elisa Kozasa here on our Cyber Sangha Facebook Live. I just wanted to say just a few words because these series of conversation with scientists, it's part of what we are trying to do, a month-long meditation for a whole year, what we call full moon practice, 24-hour full moon practice. So every full moon, we are meditating 24 hours uninterrupted, joined by different groups from all around the world. And so we started 2021 like that. We started with the body. So basically what we have is body, what we have is our speech, what we have is our mind. Body, our speech, our mind is what construct us as a human, as who we are. And these three things are, we call it doors, 3 doors, go sum. So either they become entrance toward ourself and higher development, self-realization, or very often they also become exit, where we disconnect ourselves from higher qualities and become more destructive. And so we have been focusing more on these 3 areas. And this month, so this is kind of the month beginning, we'll be starting on the mind. So we have every time when we do on the mind, I give a session, a talk on that, and then we invite expert scientists on that topic, and then we will start actual practice. So this is part of it. So I wanted to let everybody knows that you can always join in cybersangha.net. Mariela is going to post the link there. And also the previous conversation, scientific conversation with the part of body, speech, and mind. I hope Mariela will be able to pull and send the link and chat box there. So that's all. So I will not take much time. And so I'll give mic back to Alex.
Thank you, Rinpoche. And let me thank also the people who were helping to put this together, Mariela in the chat, but also Polly really organizing it, everything, and here today with us as techs, Milos and Daniel. So thank you, everyone. So let me ask Eve first. And Eve, again, welcome to our forum. And I wanted to start with, how did you get into the work that you're doing today?
Yeah, thank you. And again, just such a delight to be here. Really honored and really joyful to be together in this wonderful group. So yeah, my path towards this work was not one of a seeker. I didn't seek out spiritual practice or even really applied science. I was actually born into this field. So my father is Paul Ekman, a very well-known scientist of emotion, specifically facial expression and physiology. And growing up, I thought his work was wonderful. We've always had quite a close relationship, but had nothing to do with me, because what I wanted was to help people directly. I wanted to address and meet suffering right where it was, kind of very in a tactile way. So my work in social work was really around, how do I meet people where they're suffering and learn about that suffering and create larger transformation and change? But what I found is, not only did I loved that work, being present and learning how to actually stay in the body in the face of suffering, I also discovered that we need a lot more tools, those of us working in the front lines of hospitals and jails and schools. And so I actually became motivated to go back and learn more about research and how do we create these interventions, and then how do we get those interventions to people who need it most. And in this time, my dad and the Buddhist scholar, author, and teacher, Alan Wallace, had created a program, Cultivating Emotional Balance, at the request of the Dalai Lama. And the program really included an education on working with our emotions. I was very inspired by the program. I thought it was an interesting idea, but I think I would never have stepped into my dad's footsteps unless he unfortunately became very ill right before the first teacher training. And so within a week, I was tasked to teach it. Elisa was one of our very first participants in that program. So I showed up with Alan Wallace, and every night on the phone or a Skype with my dad, we tried to figure out the curriculum and build it as we went along. And I discovered almost instantaneously, just this is the what I've been looking for. This is the way to translate education of compassion and an education of emotions that would really help people. So here I am.
Thank you. And we're delighted that here you are. Elisa, if you want to tell us a little bit how your path came to be, and then maybe connect to when you connected to Eve as well.
Yes, well, I have a Japanese background, and I was anxious and hyperactive kid, and I loved martial arts. And so I went to Aikido classes. Aikido is a martial art. And so I start to feel my body and to start to practice some kind of short meditations. Yeah. And then when I was a teenager, I started to practice meditation by myself. And after that, going to some Buddhist centers and trying to learn something more. And I thought, if it is working for me, maybe it may help other people. And so when I finished my degree in biology, I have a master and a PhD in psychobiology. And during my PhD, I started to study the effects of meditation in anxiety and depression symptoms. And then I started my scientific career. I was always thinking about, attending some kind of meditation program. Yeah. And something that I was wanting is to learn from someone who is really, who really had a deep knowledge about the topic. So when I was aware that Alan Wallace and Paul Ekman, and after that Eve, started the Cultivating Emotional Balance program and the teacher's training. I went to the first teacher's training in 2000, and it was my first experience with Eve. And after that, we had the opportunity to talk, and we discovered many things in common, such as surfing. We love surfing.
Great. Thank you. That is great too, right? I mean, it's also another aspect of this body, breath, mind, that it's not just all when we think of mind, it's not really just here, but as we think of emotions and so forth. And actually as a mind with capital M, if you would, maybe more at the mind heart, but certainly surf, as you say, can be another way of connection. So I wanted to get into the topic of, sometimes we call these emotions, as we were talking off camera, destructive emotions. And this is a term, Eve, that you have in your work or in your father's work, and Alan have used this term quite, this particular term, destructive emotions. Do you want to tell us a little bit about how that term came to being in that, and how do you see it today, maybe?
Yes, I would be happy to. So I think it's really important to start with a basic definition of emotion from the psychological point of view, and maybe reflect on the differences possibly from the Buddhist psychology point of view. It's really, both are so helpful and interesting, and both give us different sides of this phenomena. And emotions, as many of us are aware, they really are fundamental to our life. Emotions are behind the decisions that we make. They motivate us. Emotions are often what helps us stay connected to those we care about. Emotions are the experiences also that we feel enormous amount of regret. They may even lead to feelings of shame or self-criticism. Oh, I can't believe I said that. I can't believe I did that. I can't believe I didn't say that, right? So emotions are fundamental not only to how we relate to the world, but also how we relate to ourselves. And as you were kind of mentioning, emotions are not simply from the neck up. Emotions involve the entire body. They're really implicated in our autonomic nervous system. And our different emotions, not only do we have distinct facial expressions or way to communicate them. So if I say, hi, it's so nice to see you, it's very different if I say, oh, it's nice to see you. The vocal tone, the facial expression, a lot of it implicates how we are feeling to others. So we see that emotions have this role in communication, but each of those emotions also has a distinct physiological signature. So our body is also responding to the opportunities and the challenges in the world. So when we think about our emotions that are constructive or destructive, often we call them pleasant or unpleasant, negative or positive. But when we're using those terms, we're really describing what does it feel like? We know it feels unpleasant to be jealous. It feels unpleasant to be angry if we pay attention. And when we feel pride, when we feel relief, that's pleasant and very nice. And yet this nuance that I think really is kind of the fruit of contemplative science, the fruit of the meeting of many scientists coming from a Western tradition with His Holiness the Dalai Lama, is a more nuanced understanding. It's not just emotions are good when we feel good and they are bad when we feel bad. It's that our emotion, that energy can be used for very helpful reasons, things that promote our own well-being and the collective well-being. Or our emotions can become actually quite, I would say, they are destructive, but they're also that element of delusional when we actually feel separate and we forget about others, and they become destructive and harmful. So from this Western point of view, we're really looking at the enactment. Is the way I act in my emotion helpful for others? When I'm angry, do I go out on the streets and protest and demand change? Or when I'm angry, do I just ruminate and drink beer all night? You can see there's a constructive or destructive from the same emotion. And when we look at the contemplative approach, it's not only how we act, it's actually the very essence of our mind. Can we identify right at the moments when we become kind of disturbed, as though there were a colored dye into our mind and it changed the way that we see the world? So that's a little bit. I could literally go on for hours and days, but just a little on my favorite topic.
Thank you. Thank you. And before I go to Elisa, I wanted to touch on Rinpoche for a moment. And Rinpoche, you were saying, as we were talking before, this difference between emotions as you see them in the West and in the East, from your training in the East and from your 30 years in the West. Did you want to say something on that?
Yeah, so as we were speaking before coming on live here, so I guess in growing up in the monastery all my life and as a part of training, we're always kind of taught, like we call these negative emotions, like these are afflictions, these are something that we need to get rid of, and in order to achieve liberation, the Buddhahood. So that kind of foundation in which the framework, which was kind of taught that way. And as growing up, that's how we learn, and that somehow there was not so much of emphasis or even enough emphasis about, well, these 5 poisons, are also good. These emotions are also good. Of course, there's in some sense, and it's like a tantric teaching, we say they need to be transformed into medicine and into positive. But somehow emotion itself as a raw, they're always kind of negative. So I think that's how it's seen. I think it's good to look at as Eve saying that there is how do you utilize them? How they become constructive rather than destructive, because emotion is part of human life. It's absolutely necessary part of our life. We need to have them in order to do anything, in order to have a relationship, in order to accomplish something, a task, in order to even realize, in order to even go to a retreat, even in order to even meditate, we need the emotions. So they are absolutely necessary part. But on the west, sometimes I think maybe there's a little bit too much attachment to the emotion, I guess. And so there is, and ultimately, this emotion needed to be transformed into, we need to be free from this emotion, I guess. So I guess there's a little bit, but I'm not saying one is better than the other one, but I think both has equal benefit, different view, and both views has absolute benefits. And we always needed to learn where you stand in a particular moment in your life, how you handle these emotions.
Thank you. Thank you. Elisa, you mentioned that coming from this Japanese background, and you were kind of a rambunctious child, and that you needed to find a way of coming down. And I know that you mentioned that contemplative practices had contributed to a sense of emotional balance. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, both in terms of your own personal aspect and maybe how that, you connected that to the research that you do?
Yeah, something to connect with Rinpoche's talk is that usually in Eastern culture, we sometimes neglect emotions, and or we try to suppress our emotions, especially in Japanese culture. It's not something good to express yourself in some cultural contexts. And so something that I learned by my experience, and of course reading books and scientific papers, is that something really destructive about emotions is to not be aware of emotions, or neglect your emotions, or suppress your emotions. And this is something that, I saw that the companies, the organizations are starting to talk about. You have a very important issue about mental health in institutions, healthcare institutions, any kind of company organization, because usually people are not allowed to express or to show their emotions, or that you are feeling bad, that you need help. You need psychological help, or at least to receive a hug from a colleague or a friend at your work environment. So I would like to make people to think about how important it is to know your emotions, to recognize emotions in others, and try to help people. I think that this mental health crisis is based on these neglected emotions.
Thank you. And as you talk of mental health, of course, we, during COVID, all this has seemed to really kind of exploded in a way, or at least exploded in our face. As you say, and also in many Western aspects of cultures, the emotions have been kind of pushed down, right? And then what happens as the pressure builds, it explodes. So many organizations, as you're saying, are asking for this aspect of mental health. Eve, I know that you're doing some work. I don't know if you want to share a little bit about how mental health you've seen that how finding this emotional balance in organizations might be helpful?
Yeah, it's a wonderful question, and Elisa, what she's pointing out is just so important, that if there is no, I would say, healthy relationship or maturity with our emotions, then we are really left to our own devices. And because of culture, often, so whether it's our culture of the family that we were born in, or the small town that we live, or what we see in the television or in the news, we get these messages explicitly and implicitly about which emotions are good to express and which are not good. And that depends on our embodiment. As a woman, is it okay for me to express anger? Or is it more preferable that I express sadness? So this way in which we kind of shape our inner experience to try to match what's expected of us, we actually create what some researchers call a sense of self-alienation. So here I am all day performing outwardly, amplifying the emotions that are good and suppressing the ones that are bad, and I lose a sense of who I am. I actually lose a sense of what it's like not only to be in the body, but to have a sense of my own mind and experience. The profound research we've seen on suppression of emotions, not only do we get that sense of alienation, it's actually worse for our physical health and well-being. So when we suppress the visible emotions, we actually have a higher arousal of the experience in the body. So the release of hormones and what is often associated with toxic stress, such as cortisol, all of this is actually increased when we suppress. So I think what we're seeing, especially in this organizational culture indeed, is when we are constantly suppressing and there's no place to express, it creates this real kind of feeling of depression, isolation, and can explode, as you said, Ale, exactly, explode quite well. And we don't necessarily need an organization where I express every emotion I feel. That wouldn't be very helpful either. Every time I'm upset, I show my frustration. Every time I'm anxious, I show my anxiety. So it's not that we're suggesting that people just, completely open up. It is, as we were discussing offline, it's this awareness. And people are always so unsatisfied by that response. So whether I am at Facebook or Apple or at the biggest hospital or at the smallest clinic, and someone says, well, what do I do? And I explain or express this need for emotion awareness. And they're like, awareness? That doesn't sound satisfying. But the reality is, there's no way that I could tell you, whenever you're angry, you should do this. Because the context is so specific. Maybe you're angry, and the reason you're angry actually has to do with something that happened very early in your life. Or maybe you're angry because truly what's happening right now, there's no justice. The way you respond would be so different. So we can't actually come up with a direct formula of how to respond to our destructive emotions. What we can do, as Elisa was pointing out, is increase our awareness so that we have choice in how we respond. Our emotions occur in under a 25th of a second. We are responding before we are consciously aware. So building the awareness is actually very hard. It's no simple feat. But the awareness itself will help direct us towards what could be a more wholesome way of responding to our world, something that promotes collaboration, that makes us have friends, makes us feel included and connected, that helps us move towards our goals, as opposed to ignoring, avoiding, denying, and suppressing our emotions and having the literal physical consequence of that.
Thank you. Thank you. Rinpoche, you started in the monastery where I think we were around 11. And one of the things that we know in the monastery, right, you take vows. And part of these vows are to channel, in a way, how you work with your emotions. Do you want to share some of that?
Well, I was just reflecting on a little bit when Eve was talking about suppressing emotion, which is something that I always often talk about. And I was just thinking, is in the monks in the monastery, are they suppressing emotions? So it's a good question. I think it's a very good question. Well, I mean, like some sense of the definition of suppressing something sounds painful, limiting, controlling, prisoning. But when something that you consciously make with your awareness, with your strength, with your discipline, when you consciously make some decision saying, I'm not going to drink anymore, or I'm not going to smoke anymore. Yes, in some sense, I guess there are moments you might feel you're suppressing your need for smoke or drink or something. But on the other hand, you're also keeping some strength of your commitment and your awareness to you're changing your biological and psychological clock internally. So that just, I think, talking about the monasteries in Vinaya, like the disciplines of the monks. But on the other hand, I think in a Dzogchen teaching, it's completely different approach. I think, as I personally, I always think that we have written so much about it and teach so much about it all the time. It's what I always feel is that space and awareness, the two most important things in order to host emotion, in order to process emotion, in order to guide emotion toward more constructive. So hosting, which means you don't say one emotion is good and you don't say one emotion is bad. And that's not a good host. When you're inviting a group of people at party at your home, you don't say that guest is bad and that guest is good, but you come anyway at my home for dinner. You treat all the guests equally. So positive emotions, negative emotions, you treat equally as a pure guest, so that you host them, accommodate them, you welcome them, you bring attention to them, you bring awareness to them, you talk to them, you listen to them, you understand them, then you guide them. Then the emotion, no matter what emotion it is, they always becomes constructive. So that there's a two space in which you host, awareness which guides it. Two are, I think, most fundamental thing in order to have more constructive emotions.
Great, and this points back to how the role of awareness, again, of we are in this panel of mind, and clearly awareness is really what guides those emotions. But even as you say, Rinpoche, even in the vows, it's not just a sense of suppression, but it's a if you could, a mindful or an aware, a limiting with some awareness. And Elisa, I know that for you, you've been very interested in how the whole area of psychology of emotions can actually help the contemplatives to achieve that emotional balance. Because many times, maybe in the West, we think, well, I'm going to just meditate and therefore I can get just some balance. And we notice that just because I meditate, it doesn't mean that those emotions don't take me here and there. So if you want to talk a little bit about that psychology of emotions and how it can help contemplatives.
Yeah. Of course, meditation practices may help us to be more aware of our emotions. But there are many strategies about how to deal with emotions. And when we are aware, and meditation may help us, we perceive that there is a huge space between suppressing and exploding. And this huge space can be called maybe management, emotional management. Yeah. And there are many practices from Western psychology, such as cognitive behavioral approach. There are many others from Paul Ekman's work. Yeah, there is something in cultivating emotional balance program, which is the timeline of an emotional episode, which is some of the most enlightened knowledge about emotional awareness. Maybe Eve may explain more about that, but what I perceive is that we may really combine this knowledge from Eastern psychology and Western psychology to better help human beings to manage your emotions.
Thank you, Lisa. And so, Eve, on that, I know that you mentioned how in these meetings with your father and his son Dalai Lama and Alan Wallace, and one of the core themes was this: how can we harness the energy of these difficult emotions and how they can become constructive behaviors or not?
Yeah, and I think one of the emotions that came up specifically in those meetings is anger. And we were talking about it as well offline here. And I'll get practical. I know people here, they really want to not just hear about these ideas, but how do I use it, right? How do I actually every day? So let's use an example of frustration that I have heard in every single country I've ever visited. I'm not sure why. This is when there are dirty dishes in the sink in the house where you live. Very mundane, right? But when we work with an emotion like anger, it's better to start with dirty dishes in the sink than how frustrated we are with the systems of oppression, with our political, that's high level. So we start with simple, with the dirty dishes. So let's say I wake up and I go into the kitchen and there's dirty dishes and they're not mine. And I just cleaned yesterday. And you can hear in my voice, right? You hear that rising up. And so when we work with our emotions, what we want to do is develop what's called granularity, specificity, somewhat like the way we apply ourselves in a practice of mindfulness of phenomena. We notice, like through all of our senses, what is happening. So as I think about these dirty dishes, I may notice that there's a whole band of frustration right here through the brow. Maybe I feel a tightening in the jaw. Maybe there's even a heat in the chest. And we want to become very, very, very good at identifying these embodied sensations so that I notice as I approach the dishes, ooh, I'm getting angry. I'm already in that period of the emotion experience. And when we start working with our emotions, as Elisa suggested, we can use a timeline. So I can think now, right? I can look back and think, what made me so angry? Was it really the dishes? Was it the dishes, or was it my story about what that means? Oh, the person I live with, they don't respect me. How could they leave these dishes there? They always leave these dishes there. And then we start to see that our emotion is not just what's happening in the world. It's our story, our script, our history. We could stay there for a decade or a lifetime, just learning about our own scripts and our own stories and our appraisal or how we project onto the world. And what's so wonderful here is science, Western science, modern science, is able to perceive a little bit of that moment where we apply our story. But it's actually contemplative practice that has spent thousands of years helping us pull apart what is perception. How do we identify right when, instead of there just being dishes, there's a huge event, I'm angry. And then I may act in a way towards the person I live with that I regret later. This is someone I live with and I act to them like, you have offended me. You are the problem. And here we see again, just the very seed of how destructive emotions, they can move throughout our day. So if I see those dirty dishes and then I come on the call with Rinpoche and with you all, and instead of being open, I'm closed. I'm still angry about the dishes. So with our emotions, we not only want to understand what's kind of underneath in the story, but we also want to be able to let go. So when we think of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, we don't think of someone who has no emotion. He has many emotions. They're very strong and you can see them, but there's not a holding on. He's not frustrated and then still frustrated minutes or days or hours later. So our emotions at a physiological level, they last about a minute, maybe 2 minutes. And so for most of us, we think our emotions are these huge stories. and they last all day. But it's our mind re-triggering that lasts all day. Outside of our conscious awareness, in the background, still thinking about those dirty dishes. So, simple example, but I think one that can be helpful.
Wonderful. That's a great example. Thank you. Thank you, Eve. And again, this holding on, as you say, and in the Tibetan traditions and the Buddhist traditions, this is one of the main attachments, right? Grasping. One of the main destructive emotion, if you would, and so it's attachment or grasping. So Rinpoche, you also have spoken greatly and written on this, and particularly in how we make these stories and how we get hooked in the stories. And as Eve is saying, even though physiologically they may actually last 1 or 2 minutes, it seems that for some of us, we keep in the same story our whole lives. Do you want to say something on that, Rinpoche?
Yes. So thank you, Eve. I think it's a wonderful story. I definitely know exactly what you're talking about, the dishwashing. And I can just tell a little bit of my personal story about dishwashing because I'm a household and a family, so a wife, teenage son. So of course, my wife used to being very engaged all the time, a lot, and now I'm trying to, during this pandemic year, I've been helping. And for my relation to the dishes is, in a way, it's not that I really like the dishwashing so much, but I don't mind the dishwashing because for me, I'm making somebody happy. I know my wife will be happy. I know my son will be happy. So it's like my attention is the happiness of somebody. Then I kind of enjoy washing dishes, So saying that, I think in a practical point of view, what you're saying, we have a dish, we have a washing of the dishes, we have a story of the dishes, and we have what you're talking about, perception, and then we have a perception of self, the story creator. I think the very important part of the story here is not so much of the story, the one who is creating the story, which is the perception of self, what I call it pain identity. The one, me, they don't respect. I, that who don't respect. I, that who need to teach my teenage how to do the dishwashing. I, who, they leave this for me to clean it. Why I have to do this? I is the perception of self, I think, plays very important role to create short story, long story, intense story, and so on and so on. So I think in the end, probably in a brain science also, when people are talking about the mountain, the height of the mountain, when they have a heavier bag on their back, then the height of the mountain goes up. When they drop their bag, then the height of the mountain comes down. The perception of the height of the mountain changes how heavy the bag is. And that's what the scientists were talking about. Then when they're talking about that, I always thought it's not the bag, it's how heavy you think bag is. The perception of self, who have a bad relationship to the bag. Bag is not a problem. It's I who have a problem with the bag and the weight and the mountain. I is always the issue. That's why we say self-aware. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Rinpoche. Elisa, I was wondering if what would be your example of the dishes? If you have anything that would be that you wanted to share on that.
Yeah, while Rinpoche was talking about his story, I was remembering that at the end of a meditation retreat, I saw the Guruji sweeping the room. Yeah. And so I told him, well, Guruji, there is a maid who may make this after the end of the retreat, so you don't need to do it. And so he answered me, well, I have time to do it. Yeah. So she may do something else, yeah, after the end of the retreat. I have time. And he was just cleaning the room. Yeah. I think that it happened almost 25 years ago, but I remember that because it was a very important lesson to me, you know. It's not about if there is someone else to do, you will leave the dirt thing for someone else. Yeah. Why can't I myself help someone? Yeah. So I think that if we start to think about the benefits of our actions, we will change the way we see the world.
Beautiful, beautiful. And so exactly, it's like what Rinpoche was saying when he was doing the dishes and with this Guruji cleaning the floor. And of course, there's been tons of metaphors, right? In these traditions where as you wash the dishes or as you clean the floor, sweep the floor, you're also sweeping your mind. So whether it's your mind or your whole mind, breath, body contingent, and so these are practices. So in a way, in terms of something practical for our viewers, you know, don't let if you have an opportunity of washing the dishes or cleaning the floor, do it, right? You're benefiting both yourself and others. So I wanted to change gears a little bit. And I know something that Eve and I had discussed, so I'm going to go to Eve again. And this idea of spiritual materialism and spiritual bypass. And the hazards of really getting into that, and how many times as we get into these practices, we fall prey to those. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yes, well, I really think it's very much highlighting what Rinpoche and Elisa mentioned, which is we can easily spiritually bypass or use these practices kind of almost as an analgesic to our emotional pain. I just want to cover it up. I don't want to dig in. I just want to cover it up. And especially if we are not clear on our motivation and intention. And this doesn't have to be coming just from a Buddhist point of view. So if we look at the evolutionary psychology, we get a sense that actually we are indeed born to be good. So one of my mentors and dear friends, Dacher Keltner, has studied extensively this idea that actually our basic nature is one of cooperation, is one of kindness. And that there is a maybe scientific evidence for samantabhadra, for our basic goodness. And when we have a sense of that, right, that the goodness is already here, we need to, as Mathieu Ricard has said before, we need to wipe away the dust from the gold of our heart so that we can then be present. If that's our motivation, our practices will really flourish. They will help us and they will help others. However, that we have these contemplative and Buddhist practices now in a modern capitalist marketplace, sometimes that gets lost. And sometimes the practices are sold, or you will feel better, less stress, sleep better. People will like you more. That is how these practices are sold. And, us as scientists, of course, we want them to be sold. We want the evidence that we are generating to convince people to try. But somewhere along the lines, if we forget what it is to have a motivation of why we do these practices, we run the risk of the practices making people more self-absorbed, kind of more focused on their own well-being. And we miss out on the opportunity for that real understanding that, wow, I am connected to everyone and everything changes. It's really this tension of capitalism in the marketplace and deeper contemplative inquiry. And I myself, I sometimes feel, I wake up at night. Am I accidentally contributing to this creation of practices that are just for one person's well-being and not for everyone? So I'm really eager to hear from Rinpoche and Elisa ideas of how do we help people really cultivate that intention and motivation no matter what.
Yeah. I was thinking of that, Elisa, and particularly as when we create research projects, right? So we write a protocol. We try people to fund it, whether it's in Brazil, in the US, wherever it is, and in a way, as Eve is saying, we're trying to sell them, right? We're going to do this because, like in the project we did, it will improve cognitive capacity. It will improve, like we found at MD Anderson, short-term memory and speed cognitive function. So we want to do it in this population too. And in a way, as Eve is saying, this is very beneficial. And at the same time, I feel that many times we write those grants to sell them to the funder. Do you have any thoughts on that, Elisa?
Yes, but I think that when we try to sell to the sponsor anyway, we think about the benefits that it may bring to the patients or for health people to promote health. Yeah. I think that science is part of the process, as well as this kind of large conversations. Yeah. So I think that these kind of conversations help to open the minds, and it complements what we do in science. As well as when you go to a Buddhist temple, you may learn more about your spirit. And so this is another piece of the huge knowledge or wisdom which is behind everything. This is the way I think now.
Beautiful. And I know that the Dalai Lama mentions how both science and spirituality help us get into that, expand our horizon of knowledge and wisdom. So, Rinpoche, as Eve was saying, there's this sense of the basic nature that even science is finding, and from your practice, as Eve was saying, Samantabhadra, we say Kuntu Sangpo, how is this? And then at the same time, you've been embedded in these practices, and yet from very early on, always very interested in science. So how does this live in you?
Okay, so I think the original question here, spiritual materialism and bypass. So I think maybe I'll just talk a little bit about that. For example, I think we have a body, and we have our heart, emotion, the highest aspect of ourself. You cannot ignore your body, saying, because I'm cultivating my heart, I'm cultivating my compassion, and ignore your body. You cannot do that. I mean, you can do that. People do that, but I don't think it's a good idea doing that. Because then people who, bad health conditions and so on, we witness that all the time. On the other hand, you cannot do what typically, like in the West, we have in California, like yoga places. There's so much into fitness and muscles, this muscles and that muscles, looking at the mirror all the time, trying to see themselves, find themselves, but looking at the muscles, not themselves. So you cannot go that extreme, that direction also. So I think in the journey, spiritual journey, we, in some sense, people do those things. They get, when they kind of awaken themselves up, and they're trying to search for a path, a more deeper inner development, personal development, spiritual development, seek for some religion, traditions, and so on. And then they somehow, they listen to the teaching, and they work with the teaching exactly their job. like they hated job in the corporation. Like I sign a contract, I need to finish my Ngondo practice within this period of time. You're not finishing, you're burnout, you're suffering, you feel guilty. You're getting into that kind of story. And so somehow I think then on the other hand, then people, like, we have a deeper emotional issues, like when fear is real fear, anger is real anger. If you are afraid of losing someone, it's a real thing. If you are angry at someone who is not fulfilling your expectations, it's a real emotion. In order to be with that person, a well and healthy, intimate, good relationship, you need to acknowledge both anger and fear, for example. And what does acknowledging means? Acknowledging doesn't mean ignoring it. Acknowledging doesn't mean suppressing it. Acknowledging does not mean creating a different story and context and saying, oh, let's not talk about that. Let's just contemplate, meditate, and let's not think about that. When you do that, you can do that. When you do that, you're not actually acknowledging it, actually feeling it. It needed to be felt. It needed to be expressed. I mean, in good relationship, people need to be able to express each other's frustration to each other. That's a good friend. That's a good relationship. When everything is covered up, everything is suppressed, everything has a different story, everything has different names, then there's no connection. So I think this notion of, sometime in the East, as Elisa said, our Eastern culture, I'm growing up there, I clearly know that part. We don't acknowledge and address our emotion well. And in the West, because we don't, coming to the West, I feel in the West, they talk about it too much. One emotion, if you spend 15 years in therapy, then forget about 84,000 emotions. You have no chance. So in some sense, I think they've got to be balanced, not bypassing it, not materializing it.
Wonderful. And this is exactly what we talk about, this synergetic relationship between the emotions and the contemplative practices and of meditation and so forth. So I know we're getting to almost the end, but we still have time. So I wanted to go back to each of you and see if there's anything in particular that you wanted to say that we didn't cover. So Eve, anything that you wanted to bring up that we haven't touched upon?
Well, there's so many new ideas here. I guess, I think what might be interesting is sharing a little bit about myself, like learning from Rinpoche recently in some of these practices and the practices, Ale, that you also highlight of what are our resources for working with emotion. So I described this emotion timeline. People can find that freely online at the atlasofemotion.com. His Holiness supported that project. We're very fortunate we can offer it to you all. But this idea of actually, as Rinpoche was mentioning, like, how do we work with this pain body? And what are the resources? And because our planet so desperately needs us to care and to feel connected and belonging with our ecology, I think these practices of finding our connection to the elements, for me, has been very transformative. And so I really want to appreciate that. I had a loss this year in addition to the pandemic and just felt a lot of groundlessness, but not the good kind of groundlessness. And to find a home in the elements has been transformative for me. And then realizing that the more I'm connected to the elements, the more I care about this planet and preserving it. So that feels something I would like to share and appreciate and end on.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Eve. Elisa.
I think that after destructive emotion episode, the most important question is, what can I do next time? What can I do different? Because emotional episodes are about learning to live better in this complex world.
Thank you. And with that, actually, I have a question. So Rinpoche, perfect timing, that we get from the chat. And it's how do these meditation practices can help us connect to space and our awareness, and how in that way we can experiment the emotions or experience the emotions in a different way?
Yeah. Wonderful question. Great question. And I think I'll just kind of make a link with what just Elisa said. There's always question about how I will do next time better. Or maybe how I'm always doing wrong every time. Even though I plan to do the right thing, but I'm always end up doing the wrong thing and the same thing like before. I think it's a really important question. So it's connected with the question Alex is asking here. And also when Alex is saying what is the left, what is the left you have to say, I always, every kind of conversation we have this kind of thing, what is the left to say? And I always feel like there's nothing left to say, This is always the same thing. This is always the same thing. It is about space and awareness. And that's the only thing. It's never a different thing. It's always a space and awareness. So the different thing is always the action is a different thing. But the foundation is the same, always got to be same. Otherwise, it's not called foundation. It's not called base. It's not called Geshe. So I guess it's always for all of us, I feel, for me personally, this is what I do, is always to remember, to keep that connection to the space. Give a space, feel a space. The greatest gift that you can give to anybody is a space. Greatest gift that anybody can give to yourself is a space. So give that gift all the time, and particularly when destructive emotions are arising. When you're lost, when you're feeling frustrated, angry, fearful, give that space. It's okay to feel it, allow to feel it. Give that space to that emotion. And give that care, attention to that emotion. And when you do that, emotion dissolves by itself. Because emotion meant to dissolve by itself. They don't need help from you. You can only help them to stay there longer, which you do, and which you don't want to do. So don't just let them breathe by giving space and awareness. That is always the same thing. I know I always tell, I have nothing more to say. This is always, I say the same thing. I will keep saying the same thing.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Well, thank you, everyone. It's been such a wonderful panel. It's been such joy for me to be able to bring this together. Rinpoche, thank you so much. Elisa, thank you so much. Eve, thank you so much. And look forward to seeing you also in person and being able to be together in that same space. But for now, we are in Cyber Sangha. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank
everyone.
you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Cyber Sangha podcast. If you'd like to learn more about Cyber Sangha, visit us online at cybersangha.net.